When a successful businessman in an expensive suit refused to give up his seat to a mother with an infant, no one expected this ordinary morning flight to become a viral sensation. But the camera captured everything: the rudeness, the humiliation, and the moment that would change their lives forever. What happened next? Who is the mysterious passenger whose exposure destroyed the career of a top manager? And how did an old military photo suddenly turn the story upside down? Listen to the end, and you'll find out how one bus incident became the most high-profile social expose of the year. The morning air felt thick with exhaust fumes as Anthony Matthews guided Bus 217 through downtown Atlanta's rush hour traffic. 23 years behind the wheel, and some days still felt like his first. He adjusted his collar, already damp with sweat despite the early hour, and checked his mirror. Same faces, different day. "Lord, give me strength," he muttered, a ritual as familiar as his route. The digital clock read 8:43 a.m. when Kenneth Whitman stormed onto the bus, designer briefcase swinging wildly, iPhone pressed to his ear. Anthony noticed his perfectly tailored suit, probably worth 3 months of his salary. "No, listen to me," Kenneth barked into his phone, not even glancing at Anthony while tapping his transit card. "I don't care what the Chinese investors think. This is my deal, my terms." Anthony watched through the mirror as Kenneth claimed 2 seats, spreading his belongings across both. A young Hispanic woman with a sleeping baby stood nearby, swaying with the bus's motion. Some people just don't see others, Anthony thought, gripping the wheel tighter. "Sir," Anthony called out, his deep voice carrying over the engine's hum. "Would you mind making space for the lady and her child?" Kenneth covered his phone's microphone. "I'm in the middle of something important here." The bus fell silent. Regular passengers exchanged knowing glances. They'd seen this script before, but something felt different today. "Sir," Anthony tried again, professional tone intact despite the anger bubbling beneath. "It's policy to—" "Look," Kenneth interrupted, standing up. "I pay good money for this service, and I don't need some glorified chauffeur telling me how to sit." The slur hung unspoken in the air, heavy and toxic. Anthony's hands trembled slightly on the wheel. In his mind, he saw his father, who'd driven buses during segregation, who taught him to hold his head high no matter what. "Mr. Whitman," Anthony had glimpsed the name on his corporate ID. "I'm simply asking you to show basic courtesy." Kenneth's face reddened. "You're watching me? Reading my name? What's next? Follow me home." He ended his call, turning to address the other passengers. "Can you believe this guy? Probably didn't even finish high school. Try to tell me what to do." Several passengers shifted uncomfortably. The young mother clutched her baby tighter. Anthony pulled the bus over, his movements deliberate. 23 years of dignity wouldn't crumble today. "Sir, either you comply with bus policies, or you'll need to exit." "Oh, I see how it is," Kenneth sneered, recording with his phone now. "Playing the power trip card? Well, guess what? I'm on the board of directors at Meridian Corporation. One call, and you'll be lucky to drive an ice cream truck." What Kenneth didn't notice was his own daughter, Emma, sitting in the back of the bus, her face burning with shame as she recorded everything on her phone. She'd chosen to take the bus to her internship, wanting to experience how regular people lived. Now, watching her father's true colors bleed through his polished exterior, she pressed share on her social media account. "My father, Kenneth Whitman, showing his true self this morning," she typed, hands shaking. "This needs to stop. #racism #exposed." As Kenneth finally stormed off the bus, hurling one last threat, neither he nor Anthony realized that within hours, their lives would be forever intertwined by a viral video that would spark a national conversation about privilege, prejudice, and the price of casual racism in modern America. The bus pulled away from the curb, and Anthony exhaled slowly, unaware that his dignified response would soon be witnessed by millions. In the back, Emma Whitman wiped away tears, watching her post-share count begin to climb. Sometimes justice arrives in unexpected ways, delivered not by grand gestures, but by quiet moments of truth captured through a daughter's lens. Kenneth Whitman's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Sitting in his corner office on the 32nd floor, he watched as notification after notification flooded his screen. His daughter's post had exploded overnight, and now his face was plastered across every social media platform. "Sir," his assistant Sarah poked her head in, her usual confidence wavering. "CNN is on line 1, and HR would like to see you immediately." "This can't be happening," Kenneth thought, loosening his tie. His reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows showed a man he barely recognized, disheveled, pale, scared. Meanwhile, across town, Anthony sat in the break room at the bus depot, surrounded by supportive colleagues. His phone had been ringing nonstop too, but for different reasons. "Man, you're a hero," his co-worker Marcus said, showing him another viral share. "Look at these comments. People are calling you dignity personified." Anthony shook his head. "I never wanted this. Just wanted to do my job, same as any other day." His supervisor, Janet, entered the room with a grim expression. "Anthony, there's more. Someone dug up information about Mr. Whitman." Back at Meridian Corp, Kenneth sat rigid in the HR director's office, watching as Linda Chun, the head of HR, scrolled through her tablet. "It's not just yesterday's incident, Kenneth," Linda said, her voice professional but cold. "There's footage from a country club incident last year, and complaints from your former housekeeper in 2019. Someone even found your old college tweets." Kenneth's stomach churned. "Those were different times, different contexts." "Context," Linda interrupted. "The context is that you called your Hispanic housekeeper a worthless illegal when she asked for a day off to attend her daughter's graduation. The context is that you threatened to have a black security guard fired for asking to see your membership card. The pattern is clear, Kenneth." His phone buzzed again. A text from his wife. "Catherine, how could you?" "Emma's devastated. Don't come home tonight." Emma, his own daughter. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Across social media, hashtag Kenneth Whitman and hashtag bus driver hero were trending. News outlets ran side-by-side comparisons. Anthony's military service record, his community volunteer work, his 23 years of pristine employment history versus Kenneth's growing list of exposed incidents. Anthony's phone rang again. Another news station requesting an interview. He declined, just as he had all the others. But this call was different. "Mr. Matthews," the voice said. "I'm representing Mr. Whitman's former housekeeper, Maria Gonzalez. There are others who want to share their stories. We believe you could help give them a voice." Anthony closed his eyes, remembering his father's words. Sometimes standing up means standing still. By afternoon, Kenneth's world had completely unraveled. The board called an emergency meeting. His country club membership was suspended. Former employees were coming forward with new allegations. "You have until end of day to clear out your office," Linda informed him. "The board has voted. Your position here is terminated, effective immediately." As security escorted him out, Kenneth noticed every eye following him, every whisper, every phone capturing his walk of shame. His $3,000 suit felt like a costume now, his privilege stripped bare. But the day's final blow came from an unexpected source. As he reached his car in the parking garage, his phone lit up with a message from his old college roommate, now a prominent news producer. "Ken, I'm sorry, but we're running the story tonight. The footage from a 1994 fraternity party, the one with the blackface incident. You were the organizer. We have the photos, the emails, everything." Kenneth slumped against his car, the cold metal grounding him in this nightmare. Everything he'd buried, every casual slight, every moment of unchecked privilege was surfacing at once. Above the parking garage, in his former office, the cleaning lady, an elderly black woman who'd worked there for 30 years, picked up a crumpled piece of paper from beside his desk. It was a photograph, a much younger Kenneth at a civil rights museum opening, arm in arm with a black man who looked remarkably like Anthony Matthews. The woman smoothed out the photo, turned it over, and read the faded inscription. "To Kenny, thanks for saving my life in Desert Storm. Your brother in arms, Tony Matthews. Some secrets refuse to stay buried, and some connections run deeper than hate." The divorce papers landed on Kenneth's motel room desk with a soft thud. 3 weeks had passed since the incident, but time had become a blur of minibar bottles and unanswered calls. The room's television droned in the background, another news segment about his downfall. In continuing coverage of the privileged passenger scandal, the anchor's voice cut through his alcohol-induced haze. More allegations have surfaced about former executive Kenneth Whitman's history of discriminatory behavior. Kenneth switched it off, his hands shaking. How did I become this person? He wondered, staring at his reflection in the dark screen. The man looking back was unrecognizable, unshaven, hollow-eyed, broken. Across town, Anthony sat in his living room, surrounded by interview requests and letters of support. His wife, Gloria, sorted through them with growing concern. "Baby, look at this one," she said, holding up a letter. "They want you to speak at the National Civil Rights Conference." Anthony rubbed his temples. "I'm a bus driver, Gloria, not some civil rights leader. You're more than that now, whether you like it or not." The weight of unwanted celebrity pressed down on him. Every morning, passengers filmed him doing his job. Every afternoon, reporters waited at the depot. His simple life had become a symbol in a larger battle. His phone buzzed, another message from Desert Storm veterans who'd served with him and Kenneth. "We remember who he really was, Tony, before all this." Meanwhile, Catherine Whitman sat in her lawyer's office, reviewing the divorce settlement. "I want you to know," she said, her voice steady, "I'm not just leaving because of the video. It's because for 20 years, I pretended not to see what was right in front of me." Her lawyer nodded. "And the house? Sell it. Give half the proceeds to civil rights organizations." She paused. "And I want to reach out to Mr. Matthews to apologize." Kenneth's phone rang, his daughter Emma. After weeks of silence, her name on the screen felt like a lifeline. His hands trembled as he answered. "Dad." Her voice was distant, controlled. "I'm calling because Mom asked me to. She thinks you deserve to know." "Know what, sweetie? I'm changing my last name." "And?" She hesitated. "I've been invited to speak at several universities. About privilege, about..." The words hit him like physical blows. "Emma, please. I'm sorry, Dad. But someone needs to break the cycle." The call ended, leaving him alone with his thoughts and the half-empty bottle of scotch. Desert Storm flashed through his mind. Anthony pulling him from a burning vehicle, both of them covered in sand and blood. When did I forget that? When did I become the villain in my own story? Anthony's evening route was almost empty. People either avoided his bus to give him peace or crowded it to shake his hand. As he pulled up to a stop near the motel district, a familiar figure stumbled toward the bus. Kenneth, drunk and disheveled, barely made it up the steps. Their eyes met in the mirror, and for a moment, time seemed to freeze. "I'm sorry," Kenneth slurred, fumbling with his fare. "I'm so sorry, Tony." The few passengers tensed, phones ready to record another confrontation. But Anthony saw something in Kenneth's eyes, something that took him back to that desert night, to the scared young soldier who'd once been his friend. "Take a seat, Ken," he said quietly. "Just take a seat." As the bus rolled through the darkening city, Gloria called Anthony's cell phone. He let it go to voicemail, unaware that she was trying to warn him about the breaking news. The cleaning lady had given the Desert Storm photo to the media. The story was already spreading. The racist executive and the black bus driver had once saved each other's lives in combat. Their shared past was about to explode across social media, complicating a narrative that everyone thought they understood. But the real shock came when Kenneth, still drunk and emotional, stood up at his stop and pulled out a gun. "I can't live with what I've become," he announced to the horrified passengers. "Tony, I need you to witness this. You need to see the end of what I am." The bus security camera kept rolling, about to capture another viral moment, but not the one anyone expected. Time seemed to freeze in bus 217. Kenneth's hand trembled as he pressed the gun against his temple, tears streaming down his face. The few passengers sat paralyzed, phones forgotten in their laps. "Ken," Anthony's voice was steady, just like in Desert Storm. "Remember what you told me that night in the hospital? After the explosion?" Kenneth's bloodshot eyes met Anthony's in the mirror. Don't do that, Tony. You said, heroes don't quit. Heroes face their demons." Anthony slowly engaged the parking brake and stood up, turning to face his former brother in arms. The distance between them felt like both inches and miles. How we get here? Anthony thought. From saving each other's lives to this moment? You want to witness something? Anthony continued, taking a careful step forward. Witness me forgiving you. Kenneth's hand wavered. You can't, you shouldn't. But I do, because I remember who you were. But you could be again. A woman in the back of the bus quietly filmed everything, her hands shaking. This wasn't the viral content she'd expected. This was raw, painful, human. I lost everything, Kenneth sobbed. My family, my job, my dignity. You lost things, Anthony corrected. Not everything. Not yet. In that moment, the desert heat seemed to ghost through the bus. Two young soldiers, one black, one white, pulling each other from the wreckage of an ambush convoy. Before privilege, before prejudice, before the world taught them to forget their brotherhood. Give me the gun, soldier, Anthony said softly, extending his hand. That's an order. Kenneth's legs gave out. The gun clattered to the floor as Anthony caught him, holding him as he broke down completely. The passengers watched in stunned silence as decades of privilege, prejudice, and pain dissolved into raw humanity. Later that night, at the local diner where they used to meet after their tours, Anthony watched Kenneth push cold coffee around his cup. The adrenaline had worn off, leaving exhaustion in its wake. The video's already out, Kenneth said quietly. Me with the gun. They're calling it a publicity stunt. Let them talk. My daughter, Emma, called. She saw it live-streamed. Kenneth's voice cracked. She's coming to see me. Anthony nodded, remembering his own daughter's words earlier. Dad, sometimes the biggest heroes are the ones who show mercy when everyone expects vengeance. The diner's television played yet another news segment about them. The Desert Storm photo was everywhere now, accompanied by headlines asking, "Can redemption follow racism?" You know what this means, right? Anthony said, looking at his old friend. People will say I'm betraying the cause, that I'm letting you off too easy. Why are you helping me, Tony? After everything. Because 25 years ago, you ran into a burning Humvee to save a black man you'd never met. That man needs to exist again. Kenneth stared into his coffee. I don't know how to find him. Start by facing every person you've wronged. Look them in the eye. Feel their pain. Own your mistakes. It's going to hurt worse than any bullet. As they sat there, their phones buzzed simultaneously. Someone had leaked Kenneth's private medical records, including his PTSD diagnosis and the prescription medications he'd been hiding for years. The new headlines were already rolling. Racist executives' actions explained by mental health issues. But the real shock came when they looked up to see Maria Gonzalez, Kenneth's former housekeeper, standing at their table. Behind her stood a group of other former employees and victims of Kenneth's past behavior. We saw the video, Maria said, her voice firm but gentle. We came to talk, not to forgive. Not yet, but to talk. Anthony stood to leave, but Kenneth grabbed his arm. Stay, he whispered. Please, I need a witness for what comes next. As Maria and the others pulled up chairs, nobody noticed Emma Whitman in the parking lot. Watching through the window, filming what would become an even more powerful viral video, one of raw reconciliation, painful truth, and the complex path to redemption. But the night's final twist was still to come, as a familiar face from Kenneth's past walked through the diner door. Someone who knew the dark secret behind his transformation from war hero to privileged oppressor. Someone whose revelation would change everything again. The diner's bell chimed as Colonel James Preston walked in, his military bearing unchanged after 30 years. The conversation at Kenneth's table fell silent. Anthony's hand instinctively tightened on his coffee cup. Hello, Kenny, Preston said, his voice carrying the weight of buried secrets. Thought it was time we finished that conversation from '94. Kenneth's face drained of color. James, why now? Because that Desert Storm photo isn't telling the whole story, is it? 6 months had passed since the bus incident. Kenneth had been working with Maria and the others, facing his past one painful conversation at a time. The viral videos of their diner meetings had sparked a national dialogue about redemption and responsibility. Emma, who'd been documenting everything, stepped forward from her corner. What conversation for '94, Dad? Preston pulled up a chair. The one about what really happened after the ambush. about why your father changed. Anthony felt a chill run through him. Some truths burn when they surface, he thought. Don't, Kenneth pleaded. They don't need to. They do. Preston interrupted. Tell them about the order I gave you that night. The one that made you choose between your friendship with Anthony and your military career. The diner seemed to hold its breath. Maria and the others leaned forward, watching Kenneth's face crumple. I was promoted to handle race relations in the unit, Kenneth said, his voice barely a whisper. Preston told me I had to distance myself from Tony. Said the brass needed a certain type of officer for the role. And you chose your career, Anthony said softly, old wounds reopening. I chose wrong, Kenneth replied. But the more I pushed you away, the more I had to justify it to myself. Each year, each promotion, I built stronger walls. Convinced myself it was about merit, not race. Emma's camera captured every word, her hands steady despite her tears. You became racist to justify abandoning your best friend? The system demanded it, Preston said. I was wrong to ask it of him, but that's how deep this rot goes. It's not just about individual choices, it's about the structures that force those choices. Maria reached across the table, taking Kenneth's trembling hand. This doesn't excuse what you did to us, but it helps us understand. Anthony stood up slowly. All these years, I thought you'd just become another privileged white man who forgot his roots. But you were running from your own shame. I want to make it right, Kenneth said, looking around the table. All of it. Then tell the whole truth, Preston suggested. Let your daughter show the world how racism isn't just about hatred. It's about choices, compromises, and cowardice. The next morning, Kenneth stood before a crowd at the National Civil Rights Conference. Anthony sat in the front row, alongside Maria, Emma, and all the others whose lives he'd impacted. My journey from hero to villain wasn't a sudden change, Kenneth began, his voice carrying across the hushed audience. It was 1,000 small compromises, each one eating away at my soul. As he spoke, Emma's new documentary played behind him, showing not just his falls, but his steps toward redemption. The painful conversations, the honest confessions, the hard work of earning back trust. But just as Kenneth reached the end of his speech, a young black woman stood up in the audience. Mr. Whitman, she called out, I'm Colonel Preston's daughter, and I have the original memo from 1994, the one that proves this wasn't just about you and my father. It was policy written and approved at the highest levels. The room erupted. Phones flashed. This wasn't just one man's story anymore. It was evidence of systematic racism at an institutional level. Anthony watched as Kenneth stepped away from the podium, no longer running from his truth. They'd all come so far from that morning on Bus 217. But the real surprise came when Emma revealed the final scene of her documentary. Security footage from the bus depot, showing Kenneth quietly driving Anthony's route at dawn, learning what it meant to serve others, while Anthony sat beside him, teaching him how to see the world through new eyes. Sometimes redemption isn't about grand gestures or viral moments. Sometimes it's about the quiet work of rebuilding, one human connection at a time. The story of Bus 217 wasn't over. In many ways, it was just beginning.